It's another top 5 episode here at LOE, and this one is contract extensions. Why Howie Roseman has to get busy on the defensive side of the ball after locking up the offense long term. All that and more coming up on this edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome on into yet another edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On podcast, your team each and every day. Thank you to our everydayers for making us your first listen or first watch if you're joining us here on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. As always, I am Gino Camilleri, your host, bringing you the only daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast for now over 1,400 episodes with my co-host Lou DiBiase. And on today's show, it's another top 5 episode, and I wanted to get into contract talks. Who are the next 5 guys that Howie Roseman is most likely going to pay a contract to? And it's Wednesday as well, and we know what that means. What's the word here on Wednesday? And we're talking contracts, and I wanted to talk about Dak Prescott and him potentially being the first $60 million quarterback. But is that going to be for the Dallas Cowboys or potentially somebody else? But all that cannot happen without our friends over at Game Time. And today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Make sure to download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms do apply. Thank you to Game Time for being a sponsor here of LOE. So let's get into today's show. So Lou and I here on Locked On Eagles discuss ad nauseum, and you're probably sick of it. And I know there are many still in the Philadelphia fandom that aren't the biggest proponents of Howie Roseman, but here at LOE, we love the guy. And one of the many reasons we like Howie Roseman as the general manager of the Philadelphia Eagles is because he's so proactive. He's incredibly okay with being ahead of the curve. He's going to be the first one to swing the bat. If he makes contact, he's hoping it's a home run. Sometimes it doesn't work out. But in the end, he took a swing, and if it lands, you end up with some guys that are lifers like Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham. On the other end of it, if it doesn't work out, you end up with guys like Carson Wentz that you have to ultimately buy out of their contract that you had extended them to. And the worst case scenario could be what happened to the Denver Broncos most recently, and they extended Russell Wilson, paid him all this guaranteed money, and he didn't even last to make it to that contract extension that they had signed him to. But Howie Roseman is ultimately pretty good in this department, and especially on offense as of recent. If you look at the contract extensions, their offense is glued together at the seams well through this decade, close to 2030 even. I mean, you just extended Jordan Mailata to the year 2029. Jalen Hurts is locked up. You have DeVonta Smith still playing on his rookie deal, already signing his extension. A.J. Brown just signed another extension. Landon Dickerson just signed another extension. Lane Johnson, you're going to figure that he's going to sign extensions like the LeBron James model, sign the one-year deals until you want to retire. But on defense, that's where things get interesting. And that's why I wanted to get into this discussion here on this top 5 episode. Who are the next 5 guys up? We're going to go 5 through 3. Then we're going to go some honorable mentions, finish it up with number 2 and 1 when we get back. So starting with number 5, this is guys I believe Howie Roseman, in respective order of do they deserve it? Have they lived up to their potential? Is there a plan in the future for them? That's kind of the genesis how I got to this. Number 5, Jordan Davis. Now you're probably saying Jordan Davis was a first-round pick. Shouldn't it be almost a guarantee that he's one of the next guys up? I wouldn't really say it's a guarantee that Jordan Davis is going to get one of these huge contract extensions that the likes of Jalen Carter will probably get, and you saw Landon Dickerson get top money at his position, and same with Jordan Mailata. Has Jordan Davis lived up to that caliber of player? No. But going into year 3, can he cement himself at least as a 2-down player that this team can find a role for moving forward? I believe so. And this team has to hope so because there is no plan in place behind him because he was the plan. So if he plays well in year 3, you're hoping at worst you believe that you have seen enough to pay him 2-down player money and he's still in the plan moving forward. At best, you get a 3-down player that you're arguing is going to get top-level money, but you're going to cash in now before he hits that next breakout year in year 4. Maybe year 3 is when he really starts to see the NFL slow down, but year 4 is ultimately where he could cash in when it comes to statistics, getting to the quarterback. So maybe Howie Roseman is a bit proactive in that department, wanting to lock up Jordan Davis after year 3. Continuing on, another defensive player, another one on the defensive line. Number 4, Josh Sweat. Now, it was difficult for me with Josh Sweat and Jordan Davis. The reason it was so difficult was because of what they have and don't have at each of those positions. On the interior defensive line, you have a top 5 player in Jalen Carter. You still have Milton Williams, who is a high-level rotational player there for you, who could see starter type of minutes and maybe develop into a player who sees a contract extension. Wink, wink. But at edge, what do they have outside of Bryce Huff, who they just paid this big money to? Jalix Hunt, this high-end draft pick that you hope can develop here in the next 1.5 to 2 years. Nolan Smith, who's a first-round pick, high expectations, has to live up to the ceiling. The guy who's in his prime right now, who should already have had an extension if 2023 didn't go awry, Josh Sweat should want to play himself in a contract for the betterment of not only himself, but for the entire Philadelphia Eagles organization. Because it makes Howie Roseman's decision of trading Hassan Reddick look that much better. It makes the questions of 2023 completely go away when it comes to how that edge group fell off, some of the rumblings that we had heard inside of the building. And Josh Sweat, we talk about him here as a top 15 level talent at the position. But did he ever reach his peak? And that's why I put him at 4. I can't give you a number 1, 2, or 3 spot on him. If he would have got the extension, I believe it might have already came, but he still can play his way back into a contract because if they didn't want him on his team, much like they did with Hassan Reddick, they would have traded him by now. And speaking of trades, that brings us to number 3. Player that they had acquired via trade last year, has yet to see the field for the Philadelphia Eagles, has yet to see a snap in the preseason, regular season in the Eagles uniform. Heck, he's only been seen in an Eagles uniform now at OTAs, but before that, it was in those crisp Eagles whites that Lou was so fond of. And that's Isaiah Rodgers at the cornerback position. And probably say, Gino, at number 3, why would he be the most likely and most deserving player? Well, let's take a look at this position. We know that Darius Slay probably has 2 good years left in him. I believe 1 very good year, and then you probably get solid play before it's a drastic fall off in year 3, potentially. Outside of that, what do you know? Well, you know that you just drafted Quinyon Mitchell, most likely is going to be that guy opposite of him, but you want him to develop into the number 1. Keelan Ringo has showed high praise at times for you, but in limited moments, still has a lot to do, but they continue to put trust in him, and I'm sure he's going to get a lot of opportunities to win that job. They have a whole plethora of other guys like Eli Ricks you throw into the equation. And heck, Mekhi Gardner you can throw in there as well. Cooper DeJean can't be left out of this discussion. Zach McPherson is on a contract year. Avonte Maddox is only back for 1 year. But Isaiah Rodgers and the history of how Howie Roseman has favored players that he has moved a draft pick for play into the hands of Isaiah Rodgers being back in Philadelphia. When Ringo, Mitchell, DeJean, and all of those other guys that I had mentioned outside of McPherson and Avonte Maddox, who we'll see what happens with those players, and James Bradbury, we're not even going to bring him into this discussion. Isaiah Rodgers is the only player in the secondary that has a pressing need of an extension. Avonte, you're going to see. That's probably more year-to-year type of thing. Zach, you don't know what you have. But Isaiah Rodgers, this team has a lot of faith in, I believe. Howie doesn't move that draft pick if he doesn't believe he has a player that is going to contribute to this team. They don't not sign another veteran at that position if they don't have faith in the competition there. And if you could be cheap in the secondary, heck, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is your most expensive player outside of Slay and Bradbury right now. You're not going to pay him top level money. We're talking $6 to $8 million a year to play this role. Could he potentially be your number 2? We'll see this year. If he does, they have a need for that next guy up that corner. It's so glaring every single year when they get to week 10 or week 11 and one of those guys goes down and they don't have a replacement. Isaiah Rodgers, could he be the next guy up? Could he already be in consideration to get a contract extension without ever even having played a snap in Philadelphia? We will see. Number 2, number 1 coming up next with a couple honorable mentions. And yes, we are going to get into some Dak Prescott contract discussion. Is he potentially going to be the first $60 million man in the NFL? Stay with us here at LOE. We aren't going anywhere. Thank you for making us your first listen. So come on back after this. It's Wednesday, and this edition of LOE is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Here in Colorado right now, even though the baseball isn't great, there's not much better than going down to Coors Field, taking in a game with some friends and family, overlooking the Rockies. And there's only one place that I go to get tickets each and every time I go, not just to go see the Rockies, to go see the Rapids, to go see theater shows, comedy shows as well. Game Time is the place to be. You can save up to 60% buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater. As I said before, flash deals where you can save exclusively in the app on select seats ahead of the game or the event. And heck, you don't even have to get tickets before the event. You can get tickets even an hour after the game starts. Download the Game Time app today to take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Create an account and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Go see the Fightin' Phils there in Philadelphia. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome on back, everyone, to this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. And we thank you for making us your first listen each and every day. And are you done listening to Fox Sports and ESPN on your TV all day and you have to turn down the volume and you're just sick of it? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 streaming channel program for your everyday need to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. And as we continue into this discussion here, this top 5 episode of Locked On Eagles, who are the next guys up? The next guys that deserve the bag. Maybe not a Brinks truck's worth, but a fair amount of money. And number 2 and number 1 potentially can get some of these Brinks truck type of contracts that we talk about in the NFL at positions that warrant it. But first, there's a couple honorable mentions, guys that I went back and forth on, but just based on history at the position, I can't out of confidence say that they're going to warrant any extension until potentially next offseason. My two honorable mentions, Devin White and Nakobe Dean. Now, law of averages, you hope one of them works out at the linebacker position for you, and the introduction of Jeremiah Trotter Jr., hopefully he can be the complement to either one of those guys. Nakobe Dean definitely has the upper hand, being a third-round pick, being a team player that this team invested highly in. But can he stay on the field? Devin White, somebody who can stay on the field. He's got a Super Bowl ring. He's still only 25 years old. If one of those two guys works out, could this be the first bigger contract extension that you see at linebacker since who even got the biggest contract from the Eagles at linebacker? Was it DeMeco Ryans? Was he really the last one to potentially get a big contract extension at that position? Because if you think about it, you look at TJ Edwards, he got those couple 1 year, 2 year deals. They were nothing huge. Kaiser only got the 1 year. You go back to the Super Bowl years. No, it had to have been DeMeco Ryans. Kiko Alonso got traded from Buffalo. That would have been by Chip Kelly, though. See, this is the problem with the confidence meter here, and this is why I went back and forth, and this is why they're only honorable mentions. But if the linebackers, one of them plays up to their ability, is this the first time we see an extension? I would be intrigued just to know what that number is that Howie Roseman is thinking. What am I paying a starting linebacker? Because it wasn't $6 million like TJ Edwards got from the Bears a couple years ago. Yes, hometown discount. I've talked about that before. But even Kaiser White at $4 million he didn't want to pay. Would he pay Nakobe Dean that much? Have you seen enough out of him? Devin White is getting under that by a couple $1 million. But if a 25-year-old player who already has a lot of success can stay on the field and become a green dot play caller, is it the worst thing in the world that one of these guys works out and you have a little bit of stability at the linebacker position from year to year? No, it wouldn't be the worst case scenario. But confidence-wise, honorable mentions when it comes to the linebackers. Now let's get to number two, and we'll finish up with number one. Number two is the fourth straight defensive player. They have to go defensive heavy. There's so many question marks. And you have to lock up the known commodities on this side of the ball. And this is why number two. It might be a little shocking to some people. You might disagree. I'd love to hear what our everydayers have to say about that. Make sure you're subscribing, by the way. Make sure you leave a comment about this in the YouTube comments or on Twitter as well. We'll get into this discussion there. Milton Williams plays a position that Howie Roseman is willing and has been willing to pay multiple players big-time contracts at. And not just one example, but multiple examples. Name any one of the guys that played next to Fletcher Cox after the Super Bowl. Or even during the Super Bowl. Timmy Jernigan gets the extension. They go out, get Michael Bennett. He gets paid a fair amount. They bring in Malik Jackson, pay him a fair amount of money. Javon Hargrave, they pay an exorbitant amount of money over the next couple years. Milton Williams is a known commodity. Jalen Carter doesn't have to get an extension for at least 2 years. Jordan Davis is unknown. And if Milton Williams hits the open market, yes, is he more than likely going to bring you back a compensatory selection? Probably. But is he going to be paid like one of the better players at his position by a team that needs a true pass rushing interior defensive lineman and somebody who is a threat against the run and can play all three downs? Without a doubt, a team would overpay for a player like that. Look at San Francisco. They lose in the NFC Championship game. And what do? They sign Javon Hargrave to a crazy contract to a defensive line that was already elite by most measures. Howie Roseman isn't going to hamstring himself and put himself into a corner by only having one known commodity on the interior defensive line locked up over the next couple years. Yes, Jordan Davis, he still has that rookie deal, but do you even pick up that first round tenure moving into his fifth year? Who knows? But Milton Williams, this might be one that you're a little later on. He could have been a touch more proactive. But if he steps into a role now with Fletcher Cox gone, where he's going to take on probably upwards of north of 40% of the snaps, let's say he gets anywhere from 5 to 7 sacks. He's constantly affecting the quarterback. He can play against the run. He can be a true partner next to Jalen Carter. Much like the defensive secondary, you really don't have to pay anybody on the defensive line in a pressing manner if you lock up either Milton or Josh Sweat, that is. If it came down to the two of them, I pay Milton Williams. I think Howie does too. Younger player. The knee, maybe with Josh Sweat, you get into that discussion. I think that's okay, though. You paid Bryce Huff. Are you going to pay a second pass rusher that money? You've paid multiple defensive tackles in the past. Do you continue to go down that avenue? It just seems like things would kind of go down the path of Milton Williams starting discussions on an extension at some point here in the near future, because this isn't one you have to wait and see on like a Jordan Davis. That's why I put it at 5. This is a number 2 confidence meter for me because I've seen enough. I think Howie's seen enough. I think a lot of teams in the NFL have him on their 2025 free agent board and are saying, I've seen enough to want to pay him as well. Milton Williams, hopefully they can lock him up. Probably looking at a number close to $16 to $20 million, maybe. But look at what the going rate is at that position. For true game-changing type of players, Milton has that. He showed that at times, man. Is it to the caliber of Jalen Carter? No, absolutely not. Is it to the caliber of Fletcher Cox? I don't believe so either. But is it good to better play in the NFL, deserving of a contract extension? Without a doubt in my mind. And that brings us to number 1, the only offensive player on the list. We've talked about the offensive line and how 3/5 are locked up for the near future. Landon Dickerson, Jordan Mailata, they're younger, of course. They'll probably be here a bit longer than Lane, but Lane still has a couple years on the deal. We'll see what happens at the right guard position. But Cam Jurgens, I think he's darn near locked up a contract extension. I can't see a world where they go into a season without having a plan in place to have somebody to take Jason Kelce's job. Like that's not going to be a situation. And Cam Jurgens was that person to avoid this. And would they put themselves in that position by allowing him to hit free agency in 2 years from now? And yes, you're still early on it, but you want to get to the forefront of this thing. So you are not paying this crazy upcharge at the center position. And Cam Jurgens, if he plays as well as he did at guard, at center, he's going to deserve the money. I put it at number 1 because of how much Jason Kelce was involved in the process of adding Cam Jurgens to this team. How important the center is to the overall culture of the Eagles offensive line as a whole, how important it is to have that connection with Jalen Hurts and the center. It's one of those things that, heck, I can remember talking about episode maybe 10 or 15, like when we were talking free agents for other team, and I'm saying, oh, Buffalo, they got Josh Allen. Why they got to sign a guy like Mitch Morse? And that's what they did. Not that I called Mitch Morse, but that's what they signed at the time. That center quarterback relationship is so key in the NFL. And Cam Jurgens working out with Jalen Hurts, having that connection locked up, that's the best thing for this offensive line. It's the best thing for the continuity of the unit. And it's probably the best thing for Jalen Hurts. Because if he knows, hey, I might not have my play caller year to year, but I'm going to have the guy in front of me just like he had Jason Kelce, at least going onto the field and having that semblance of comfort, knowing 4 out of the 5 guys in front of me are legitimate all-stars. Yeah, you're going to feel pretty good about yourself. And offensive line, I'm so confident that that's the one position they put above everything else, simply because that's what they have done. It's what they continue to do. It's what they always will do. It's Jeff Stoutland's world. We're just living in it. And that's another top 5 episode for us. Let me know your top 5 of Eagles that you believe are most likely to deserve a contract extension. And speaking of contract extensions, to finish up today's show, what's the word on Dak Prescott's contract? Finishing up this episode of LOE. Don't go anywhere. All right, my everydayers, welcome on back to this Wednesday edition of LOE. Finishing up the show, we talked about the top 5 Eagles most deserving of a contract extension from Howie Roseman. Went heavy on the defense, light on the offense, but Howie Roseman did a great job taking care of business on that end. And he did a great job doing that with his quarterback in Jalen Hurts. Now, there's a team that's in the NFC East that isn't the Giants, isn't Washington, that has a quarterback who most likely is going to be the first guy to make $60 million at his position. Is that going to be from Jerry Jones? Well, what's the word on Dak Prescott's contract? Why is Jerry Jones, who has a known commodity, going into a year where you said you were all in? Do you, one, believe that 2025, that class, between the free agents, between the draft class, that there's somebody better than Dak Prescott? 2, if you're going all in this year, you probably have a fair amount of pieces already locked up that you want to build with. And you're probably going to pay CeeDee Lamb, and you're probably going to pay Micah Parsons. But if this is the group you want to go all in with, and you want to swing for the fences, why are you putting the support behind this quarterback now, but you're not willing to extend him? Speak out of both sides of your mouth. That's what I'm getting from this. To me, Dak Prescott deserves that money. He deserves it. And I'm not trying to be like your classic, oh yeah, keep paying Dak Prescott. We want Mike McCarthy as a coach. No, I'm not doing that. I genuinely think there's not a better option than him. They waited too long for guys like Trevor Lawrence and Jalen Hurts and this whole group of young guys to get their extensions. So now they're backed against the wall. If Dallas doesn't pay him $60 million, somebody is going to pay him $60 million. You don't think Mark Davis, his fancy new stadium there in Las Vegas, be willing to bring in a record-setting quarterback, $60 million man, bring him in there? What about the New York Giants? Flip that one on your head. What if they come into the discussion and pay him a lot of money? What if Dak feels slighted? That's how this contract comes full circle. That's why being proactive is so important. Because one, it puts you in a position where you don't play the game of the franchise tag. Two, you don't play the game of having no leverage. Dallas doesn't have leverage. Their leverage is gone. Their leverage was the guys that had yet to sign extensions at that time. They had then gone out and signed extensions. Now Dak has it all. Oh, Dallas, you're not paying me as much as Trevor Lawrence is getting? Well, look at what I've done. Look at my resume. Hold that up. Jerry, what are you going to get? Oh, you're going to go all in on Shedeur Sanders? We're going to do this game, this dog and pony show? Or are you going to pay the guy that you know can play the position well? You draft to beat your division? He kills the Eagles. He's an Eagle killer, man. Like, I don't know what more to say. He kills the Giants. Kills them. I think it would be bad news. I think it would be bad for the NFC East if he goes. Unless he stayed with the Giants. That would be quite a story that can only be written in the NFC East. But the Eagles are the best when the rest of the teams around them are their best. Just read the stories of Parcells and Gibbs and how good the NFC East used to be in the Buddy Ryan days and how they used to push each other. If we're talking about potentially Daniel Jones going in, maybe another rookie quarterback there, and potentially Dallas drafting another rookie, where's Jalen Hurts' competition inside of the division? It's going to take a couple years. Yeah, Jaden Daniels will probably push the envelope, and whoever these two teams expect to draft will probably push the envelope. But if you're going all in, and if this is the year, and if you believe this team and this core, the guys that you're going to sign, and Micah Parsons and CeeDee Lamb, this is the team, I think you have to take the approach with Dak Prescott. Like, you're not paying CeeDee Lamb the money he deserves without the output that was helped along by Dak Prescott. It kind of goes hand in hand. What's the word? Why isn't he extended yet? I'm genuinely curious what's going on there in Dallas. Is it a discussion that Howie Roseman would get himself into? Kind of worked himself out of some worse situations at quarterback. But one thing I will tell you, if Howie Roseman believed in his guy at quarterback, even if it might be wrong in the end, like I said on the intro, he's going to take that swing of the bat. He's going to take that swing of the bat. Now, is it a $60 million swing of the bat? Did it for 51. But if Jalen Hurts was a first-round quarterback and they didn't work out that extension until this year, he could potentially be willing and have to pay that money. But if you're not willing to pay your quarterback top dollar, do you have your guy? And that's where the discussion leads us. What's the word on Dak Prescott? Dak Prescott's contract. Is it going to be an extension? Or is it going to be the quarterback somewhere else? What's the word? You tell me. Because I told you all I had to tell you here on this episode of LOE. We thank you, as always, for making it your first listen here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team each and every day. Make sure you are subscribing wherever you get the show. If you're watching along on YouTube, hammer the subscribe button as well. Make sure you leave a comment if you like the show. Tell me who your top 5 Eagles that deserve a contract extension are. On Twitter, you can interact with us as well at GC24_football. Check out my co-host at DiBiase LOE and the mothership at Locked On Birds. Check out Locked On Phils, Flyers, and the other team in Philly, the Sixers. Make sure you check them all out. As well, make sure you check out every Locked On Eagles episode 5 days a week. Training camp is slowly approaching, and we will have you covered each and every day leading up until that point and leading into Season 7 here at Locked On Eagles for Lou and I. But for today, that'll do it for me, Gino Camilleri, signing off as always. And I'll leave you like I always do. Fly, Eagles, fly.